Chart update 15th of June. Descent into Marxist utopia. Nations forsaking their hard-working private sector economies, protecting as by right their public sector workers, a people trained not to think but to obey, the state as parent. Note to censors: we use only government data. If you have a problem with the results, speak to the government. Being brought up on tales of World War II, which my father served in, a straightforward struggle to survive against a totalitarian ideal, it is hard to adjust to our current post-democracy nation, a nation where the government decrees one-way lanes in shops and the people obey, as in a dream. I knew that we would lose this battle, given that the entire of the estate was arrayed against us, but I had not accounted for quite how it would feel to see how our state has so easily transitioned from a nominal free society to obedient serfdom, with the serfs indeed demanding protection from life itself. The state is of course delighted to oblige. What could be more to their taste than a people craving more intervention, more of whatever the politicians serve up? The emperor is stripping the last vestige of self-directed life from the people, and they are giving up their vestments with a shrug and mute compliance. It is devastating to behold. Someone asked how the anomalies I point out, with Belgium and the UK now ranked number 1 and number 2 on the world death list, have not been noticed by others. I have no answer other than that the media has been astonishingly adept at not noticing anything that might contradict the agenda. So this chart update is something of a keepsake, a little something to put in your back pocket, to remember that you at least were aware and free of the mass hypnosis or simple laziness that has prevented entire nations from bothering to check the most simple facts, for they are indeed simple, and they are indeed facts. Here is the current ranking of 146 countries with over 1 million population and over 1,000 cases. I'll put it full screen, but it will be small even then. Here, though, is its essence, with our friend New York State and City thrown in, and California to offer balance. A virus which attacks the centers of Western power hundreds of times more than the half a world, literally, that escaped with tiny figures. Including probably deaths, purely because if they want to include them, fine, let's include them. New York City has managed to experience a virus just shy of 700 times worse than the 10 nations of Southeast Asia, and no one noticed. The Far East is literally half the world, 3.9 billion people, and half a world away, and in that, I suggest, lies its salvation. Look at those figures: 500 deaths per 100 million, about a fifth of one day's deaths, a pittance, and no one noticed. And it is not a case of lucky countries escaping. These are your brethren: Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, any one of whose figures the West would find astonishing. But in a world of global media, no one noticed. USA, New York, EU, Belgium, Brussels, UK, with loyal and core members filling the ranks until South America finally breaks the ordering, appearing remarkably to have a real issue with the virus, the only continent to do so. The Europe that is not the EU did not have a problem with the virus, having very modest figures, not quite Far Eastern, but perfectly benign. It is only the Western power centers who exceed all rational explanation, except the most obvious, and no one noticed. The indolence of the populace, who apparently have no thought to do other than absorb the means on the media, is devastatingly depressing. Fill their heads with alarm and titillation, and it seems not one person out there in that sleepwalking mass will ponder anything beyond the last and latest headline. It is like some bizarre real-world subversion of Dark City. So here you go, the charts, and a mea culpa. Greg, a viewer from California I believe, pointed out that in the last update the actual to normalized deaths calculations didn't add up, should be actual times 100 over population, and he was right. The normalized figures were correct, but the range that pulled the actual figures for display in the table hadn't been extended to include the latest data, so they were recording figures that from perhaps a week or so earlier. Apologies and hats off to Greg for doing his due diligence. The maths works, and if it doesn't, give us a heads up. Italy is always leading off, and while it's done, it seems determined to linger at the 100 deaths a day mark. There's a lot that we could point out: the 14-day implied death rate hitting 100%, the decline in growth going flat, characteristic of our manipulated nations. But today, does it matter? All the evidence is here in these charts, but the world, it seems, is determined not to operate on fact, not to investigate, not to fight to ensure its freedom, so they're a keepsake, for your eyes only, it seems. The UK continues its slow and mortal decline. Look at that rapid oscillation in the black percent of standard mortality chart. That's a signal. The numbers may look random, but they're not enough. You see the same in the deaths chart. A natural phenomenon is jiggly, not spiky. Deaths peak ahead of cases peak, implied mortality touching 100%, growth rate going flat at peak. The UK has it all. Out in the world, in Africa, Algeria, at 0.7 death days, 0.8% of overall mortality. This is how the virus is experienced when you're free of Western agendas. South Africa, and after its first and well-handled contagion, it just won't quit. But a risk? Look at the overall mortality, flatlined at the bottom. It's slowly climbing to reach Hubei. Let's see if it curls over first. Zambia, and a minuscule event. Can you imagine what that would be like in the US, EU or UK? A minuscule event? A far cry from our experience. The Americas and Barbados, done, sorted, and hopefully the experience hasn't spoiled that lovely island. Brazil in South Central America seems to be the only place both having a real contagion and a real but hardly existential problem. Brazil curling over looks like it might indeed be at peak. Canada, and like Italy, seems determined to hover at its 100 deaths a day mark, but that's 4% of 2464 deaths a day, so hardly a material threat to society. Ecuador looks like it's got a real problem, but problem, not like crisis. At an overall 10% of normal mortality, it barely registers as a common item to put on death certificate. Mexico, and climbing though curling, hasn't even had 1 week's deaths yet. 6% overall mortality is going to have to work a lot harder to be a crisis. The USA not, despite its many claims to same, the world's worst hit nation. Sorry but sure, New York, that's the gold medal in the Viralympics. No one's going to get close to that. However, the USA as a whole still manages to rack up some interesting features. Look at the flag waving in cases, bottom left, and deaths, and the flatlined at peak. No decline for you when it can be milked. Back to the EU and one of our textbook countries, the others being Germany and Switzerland, go figure, with nice orderly curves, separated 2 weeks apart. 3 deaths a day, 3 death days. Yawn. Belgium, and so over, but wow, did they give it a good run or what? Over 100% on multiple days, standard mortality, nearly 40% overall mortality, world leader in manufactured death, or awfully unlucky. The amusing thing is that this is the world's most massively exaggerated country, and it is still less than 40% of normal mortality. Ordinary life is still more dangerous, but did anyone notice? Croatian, not a core EU country, and it shows 0.5 Hubei deaths. Overall mortality 1.3%. Denmark, lingering excess cases and deaths 2 times Hubei, but overall mortality 4.5%. Suspicious no-lag cases to deaths, but at those levels not an existential threat. A typical EU result. Finland in line with Hubei, so a good result for Europe. Proper curves, extremely low overall mortality 2.8%, COVID not an issue then. France, a core EU nation, and it shows 17.7 death days, 8.3 times Hubei. Its standard daily mortality looks like one of its curves, spiking to 100%, implied death rate in the 80% range. Yep, they really pushed it, but still couldn't break 15% overall mortality. Germany may be in charge of Europe, but it still does things properly. 14-day lag, proper curves, 4 death days, overall mortality 4.4%, alles in Ordnung. Greece, poster child for EU disobedience, 0.7 death days, 0.3 Hubei, nearly Far Eastern result. Perfect curves, invisible daily mortality and overall mortality. Bravo Greece. Note to UK, it didn't have to be this way. Hungary, another non-aligned nation, and so 1.1 times Hubei in deaths. Good curves bottom left, overall mortality 2.6%, I think. That print is small. The message is clear, but no one notices. Don't be part of the EU cabal. Iceland 1.1 days deaths, 0.5 Hubei, overall mortality 1.3%. So much for COVID. Ireland back to a core EU member and 13.9 death days, 6.6 Hubei. Good curves at least and essentially done, though lingering at that 100 deaths a day mark. Again about 4% of normal daily mortality. Malta 0.7 death days, 0.3 Hubei, almost Far Eastern, minuscule overall mortality at 1.1%. Netherlands perfect curves but 14 death days, 6.7 times Hubei, no cases deaths lag, 75% implied death rate, a loyal EU core member, right next to Belgium, with high figures but completed contagion. Norway, and a strong contrast to the Netherlands, 1.8 death days, 0.9 Hubei, completed curves, minimal overall mortality, at 2% of normal deaths during the period, not a core EU member. Poland, bizarre cases testing maybe, because the deaths curve looks somewhat more normal, but with a second outbreak, minimal overall mortality and 0.6 Hubei, not a core EU member. Portugal, 6 death days, 2.8 times Hubei, good curves, but a second outbreak curtailed. Low overall mortality, a reasonable result for an EU member. Russia, 0.9 death days, 0.9 times Hubei, looks like it's past peak, minimal overall mortality. Aligned with the US-UK-EU axis? I don't think so. Spain, 2 completed curves, but at what a price. 24.6 death days, 11.6 times Hubei, implied death rate 322%, up to 80% daily mortality, but still only 24.4% overall mortality. Nice try, but not an existential crisis. Sweden, and if I thought it couldn't get more bizarre, I was wrong. Dramatic spike in cases, testing maybe? Vivid oscillations in its recorded deaths, a signal of a random number generator. They are determined to keep Sweden going until it tops the charts and the world gets the message. You should have locked down. Never mind that South Korea, Switzerland et al. Never locked down. Switzerland, it pays to obey. 7.8 death days, 3.7 times Hubei, but it's over, duty done. Overall mortality 7.7%, not an existential threat, and they never locked down. They were quite dismissive of lockdown, in fact. Turkey, 2.3 death days, 1.1 Hubei, a good European result. minuscule overall mortality, not EU then. Back out to the Far East and the land where normal is excellent. 0.2 death days, 0.1 Hubei, 0.2% overall mortality. And we can't have this because, and nobody notices. China, which is really Hubei, but it's in the World Health Organization, so here it is. Indonesia, 0.3 death days, 0.1 Hubei, overall mortality 0.3%. Remind me, are they close to Brussels? I don't believe so. Japan and those long languid curves which actually look quite sharp and normal bottom left. Minuscule 0.2% overall mortality. We're living in a dream world in the West, a very bad dream. Korea, the Republic of, having a little mini second outbreak. I'm sure they'll handle it as adeptly as the first. Here's the country a responsible government would have questioned for advice, not us. Malaysia, 0.2% overall mortality, just about says it all, flatlined while our politicians can't get enough deaths. New Zealand, 0.2% of overall mortality, the non-event. Did anyone in the Western media notice? Of course not. Philippines, flatlined, 0.3% overall mortality. Just how determined do you have to be to ignore the results of the half of the planet not in the grip of the agenda? Singapore, a city-state so not unlike the city and state of New York, except that its mortality is flatlined at 0.2%, 0.2 death days, whereas New York is at around 50 for the state, 100 for the city. Thailand, another flatlined overall mortality. Nothing to see here, folks. And nobody looking anyway, certainly not the Western media. Vietnam, the country with a death, but it got cancelled. Last region, loosely the Middle East and Central Asia, and here is India, very late to the party, still climbing, but curling over. However, with an entire continent, this could go on for a while. Iran, done and dusted, and then a second outbreak. A rare occurrence, as you'll note. Please, no wave. Overall mortality 3.7%, hardly a crisis. Iraq, another sorted but not quite, so here we go again. Look at the flatlined overall mortality though, another non-crisis, for now at least. Israel, 1.3 death days, 0.6 Hubei, very tidy, no problem. Pakistan, another late arrival, though it got started in late Feb, so it's been around. A grand total of 0.5 death days, 0.2 Hubei, far eastern but still climbing with slight curl over. UAE, and looks like it's sorted, 1.2 death days, 0.6 Hubei, not an issue. On that note, it's time to quit. Same story, with most of the countries we're likely to be focused on either done or fading out. Watching Sweden getting punished is going to get old. Everything a viewer needs to know about the essence of this manufactured crisis is right here in these slides. COVID-19 is real. The crisis is not. Compare the figures from literally half the world, half a world away, compared to what we in the West are supposed to be experiencing. We are certainly experiencing a crisis, but it is the death of democracy and its replacement by the indifference and thus implied consent of the people, by a state thinking for you, providing for you, supporting you. Just who is going to pay the bills with the abandoned private sector sinking fast? Naturally, if any videos or topics strike me as compelling, I'll put them up, and I'll support other authors as best I can, but frankly, it's been a long and intense haul, and as with 9/11, as with road safety, we can show the facts, but with the mass hooked so deeply into the intravenous feed from the authorized media, facts carry little weight. And what the heck, as I mentioned it, do let me know which is the B-757 striking the Pentagon per the official prosecution testimony, and which is the patch of smoke from the smoke trail superimposed on a clean background. One of them is me, one of them is the official US government story for 9/11. Uh-huh. So there you go, ending not on a conspiracy theory, but as always with our work, the analysis of the government's own data and evidence. If it doesn't add up, don't troll me. Go troll the government. By all accounts, we've kept each other sane a little bit these past 3 months, a time that should by rights have seen the government admit that it was scared into an absurd overreaction by fraudulent claims from Imperial College, based on a model that shouldn't be let near a virus analysis, for the flaws highlighted in our separate series. It didn't quite work out that way, did it? Stay sane as best you can. Read up on life in the Soviet Union and East Germany, which I suspect are probably the best models for what we're going to be going through. Or, of course, there's always Orwell, a warning that turned out to be a blueprint. Huh. Take care. Unlike Arnie, we might not be back, but we'll just have to see. Thank you, all of you, even the trolls who took the time to visit and view and occasionally comment. It's been real, everything except the crisis. I'm Andrew Mather, a 60-year-old Brit, mathematician, financier, technologist, husband, biker, pilot, healer, whatever. Feel free to get in touch, andrew@peerlessreads.com or andrew@amather.com. Either should get to me.